Shalom. So in this video, we're going to look at Genesis chapter 1 and verse 14. What we're going to understand that this is the beginning of science, the beginning of knowledge, the beginning of agriculture, the beginning of civilization, the beginning of the calendrical cycle for the year, right? So we're going to look at a few different aspects. First thing we're going to look at is, what is time? We're going to look at the difference between the celestial and the terrestrial. We're going to look at how our words defined from the Hebraic standpoint, right? Because in the Hebrew language, it carries a concrete as opposed to an abstract meaning, right? It has a foundation. We're going to look at the lights in the firmament and their functions according to Genesis chapter 1 and verse 14. We're going to look at agriculture. We're going to look at the entire calendrical cycle, the circuit of the stars throughout the course of the year, which gives us the different seasons. We're going to look at the lunar feast days, the solar festivals also. So we're going to cover everything. So let's get started. Okay, so the first question is, what is time? How would you define it? How would you answer it? Now, time is the interval between two or more thoughts, activities, events of your experience. That means what time may be for you might not be the same for me, right? And then we're going to go through examples. So to say, time is a concept of the human mind, right? So let us go to the book of Genesis chapter 1 and verse 2. It says, and the earth, matter of fact, let's start at verse 1. In the beginning, God created the heaven and the earth. And the earth was without form and void, and darkness was upon the face of the deep, and the Spirit of God moved upon the face of the waters. What would be the concept of time there? Because this is like a narrator speaking about something. There's no actual event taking place, there's no actual activity being done, right? So there's no concept of time. Now let us go to verse 3, and then we'll come back with some examples. It says, and God said, let there be light, and there was light. So what we're seeing here is the first thought or the first activity took place here. What's the first activity? And God said, let there be light. So if I should write it, it would be like this. Say, God said, let there be light. And there was light. So here's an example. The first thought, God said, let there be light. Right? But remember, time has to be an interval between two or more things. God said, let there be light, it's still 0.00. When the second thought or the second activity comes, that's what the duration between the two events. This is what you call time. And there was light. That's the second event, the second activity. So this is the concept of time. The duration between two thoughts, two events, two activities, right? But in actual reality, it's events take place in eternity. So from the standpoint of the Most High, there is no actual time. It's just eternity. From the standpoint of our minds, because that's the only way we can relate to these events our activities through our thoughts, through our mind, right? So the mind is measurable. So this is why we perceive things through time, but they are really happening in eternity, existence, right? Now, we mentioned earlier about the darkness. What was the concept of time in darkness? There's no concept. This is why in the beginning it was just literal darkness, right? No, when a person says a baby stays in the womb for 9 months, is it 9 months from the standpoint of the mother, or is it 9 months from the standpoint of the baby who is actually in literal darkness? You see? So it's the experience of the mother that can say it takes 9 months. But from the child, it's just eternity. There's no activity, no thoughts. It's the same when you're asleep. What is your concept of time when you're asleep? When you're sleeping, you don't have any concept because the mind is not present. So if there is no thoughts, there is no concept of time. When you wake up in the mornings, the reason why you can say, oh, you had an 8 hour sleep or 10 hour sleep or 5 hour sleep is because your last thought before you went to bed, you know that it was around probably 9 or 10 o'clock. And then you know what time you wake up. So you can measure the interval or the duration or the distance and say you slept for about 8 hours. No, what happens when you have to go back, you get off work at 3, you have to go back to work at 5 or something of the sort, and you say you're going to take a 15-minute nap. Sometimes you end up cannot go to work because you slept past the hour. You see, it's hard to measure. So sometimes you're sleeping in the day, you say, oh, you just took a 5 minute. But when you check the time, you see that, oh, I've been out for 4 hours, right? So the thought has to be there for the concept of time. So what happens is we're all experiencing eternity, but the only way we can relate to it is through our minds. The minds are limited. Time is limited. So that's the only way we can relate to it. But if you look at it in reality, it's just eternity. For example, what if you say you want to see how long, no, this moment, no, what you call this moment, no. How long would it last? If you should start now, what time would you stop? So now would be eternity, and our experiences are taking place there. But we relate to those experiences through our thoughts. And this is why we say, okay, from you wake up to when you have breakfast, that's measurable, right? From the time you had breakfast to the time you took a shower, that's also measurable. From the time you took a shower to when you have dinner, all of that is measurable. But if you remove the concept of time, you'll see all of it is taking place now in eternity. This is why the Most High says also a day for us is like 1,000 years because there's no time in the celestial realm, in the spiritual realm. The sun, the moon, the stars, everything up there, they are celestial things. They are not governed by time, which we're going to look into. So let's go to the book of First Corinthians, chapter 15, and verse 40. It says, there are also celestial bodies and bodies terrestrial, but the glory of the celestial is one, and the glory of the terrestrial is another. So terrestrial is earthly things. So the trees, humans, animals, everything down here, we are mortals. We are defined by time. This is why you hurry trying to get things done before the night comes down or before a certain, time. We are defined by time. The clouds, the sun, the moon, the stars, whatever it is up there, they are not limited. The Most High is not defined by time. So you cannot put a time period to say the sun, the moon, the stars were, and no, they they are superior to time. We can relate to events through the concept of time, but they are not limited to time, right? No. How are words defined in the Hebrew language? We have to understand the importance of our language. Your language, your culture, and your identity, they are one and the same. So to say we're a people, we're a nation, and we want to go back to the laws is what? Is about a culture. And to have a culture, you have to have a language. And within the culture, within the language, is your identity, right? So let's see if they're the same when they're translated to another tongue. For example, let's think of father. Father in English, if you look at the definition, it would say a male parent. Mother in English, the female parent, but it doesn't say much about characteristic, the characteristics of the person, right? Now let's look at the same thing from the Hebraic standpoint. Okay, let's put it here. Now, this is the Hebrew word for father. This is the Hebrew word for mother. Abba, Amma, right? When you look at the this represents the strength, right? Strong, strength. Ba represents the house, the tent, the family. So in the word itself, it's telling you that the strength of the family is the Abba, the father. Amma, which is mother, the strength, strong. Ma would be water, strong water. Well, that doesn't really make much sense, right? No, when you get more into it, is when you use the water to boil the skin of the animals, you make glue. What is the function of glue? To keep things together. So the strength of the mother is to bind or bond the family together. And this is why it is important to teach your wife that she has um the same amount of wisdom as you, to be your equal counterpart, because that wife is the one that's going to be educating your culture, meaning teaching your children, your sons, your heirs, right? She's the one that's going to be educating them. So you want to fill her, you want to pour into her as much wisdom as possible, right? So that's the strength of the mother, to bind the family together. No, the only language that is close enough to the Hebrew language is the chemical language. You know why? When you talk about water, right, you hear H2O. What is this telling you? You have two hydrogen molecule and one oxygen molecule. So in water, you know what it is, right? No, they're putting chlorine in the water, right? But guess what? It's not considered part of its inherent nature, because this is something that's added to it. So even though when you turn on the tap at your house, there's chlorine in that water, but it's not essential to it. That's something that's added. So it's still H2O. This is the closest language you'll find to the Hebrew. So that's why the book of Sirach said, when translated from one language to the next, it doesn't carry the same force. This is what it's talking about. It takes away the concrete understanding. What are the lights in the firmament of the heaven, and what are their functions or operations? Let us go to the book of Genesis, chapter 1, and verse 14. It says, "And God said, let there be lights in the firmament of the heaven to divide the day from the night, and let them be for signs, and for seasons, and for days and years, and let them be for lights in the firmament of the heaven to give light upon the earth." And it was so. And God made two great lights, the greater light to rule the day, and the lesser light to rule the night. He made the stars also. So we can safely say the lights are the sun, the moon, and the constellations. No other lights are in the heaven. The sun, the moon, and the constellations, right? So now we need to understand what are their functions. From the sun, we get days and years. From the moon and the constellations, when we say moon or lunar, the constellations are included, right? From the moon comes nights, weeks, and months. So let us go into the breakdown of these so we can understand it from a realistic standpoint, from a concrete understanding rather than something abstract, right? So we're dealing with days. Genesis chapter 1 and verse 3. It says, "And God said, let there be light, and there was light." So the subject matter is light. The subject is light. "And God saw the light, that it was good, and God divided the light from the darkness." So, so there's light. Now it's divided from darkness. It says, now he's going to name it. "And God called the light day." So the same light, verse 3, verse 4, verse 5, is named. "And God called the light day, and the darkness he called night." So what you're seeing now is that the darkness that's here, it's night. The darkness in verse 2 is not night. It's not measurable by time. It's just deep eternity. There's no concept of time, right? Also, night, you can say the hours are measurable from, say, 12 hours or 8 hours, or depending where you are and the time of the year, right? But when you go to the darkness in verse 2, how long would you say that darkness lasts? How many hours would you say? None. It was eternity, right? So darkness, literal darkness, is different from night. So he says, "And God called the light day, and the darkness he called night, and the evening and the morning were the first day." Now this is very important. He called the light day, and he called the darkness night. He says, the evening and the morning were the first day. Remember, night was separated. Now he's going to talk about the components of a day, evening and a morning, right? Now let's look at that. So here we have this circle is not a circle of the earth. This is a circle of the heavens, right? No, evening and morning. The sun, when it comes across the eastern horizon, from that point, looking at the eastern horizon, until here, let's call here the zenith, the center of the sky that's overhead. From the eastern horizon coming all the way up over your head, that is called morning. Now, from over your head to the western horizon, that is called evening, and that complete movement of the sun is called day. And throughout different seasons of the year, the hours changes, right? Because when it goes to summer season, the daylight periods are longer. When it goes to the winter, it's shorter, right? Depending on what region you are. Now, the next thing we're going to look at years. Years come from the sun, right? So it has a starting point and it goes all the way around and completes a revolution. So you can say it does two revolution, right? So the first 6 months would give you your spring and summer days, where it gets longer. For the next 6 months, it gives you the shorter and the colder periods, right? Now, the entire revolution is called a year. And throughout the course of a year, there are 12 months, right? Now, this is the book of Exodus, chapter 34, and verse 22. It says, "And thou shalt observe the feast of weeks, of the first fruits of wheat harvest, and the feast of ingathering at the year's end." What is the feast of ingathering? Tabernacles. When is tabernacles? In the seventh month, right? But notice it says at the year's end. So it's not talking about the end of the 12th month. It's talking about the end of the revolution in the northern hemisphere, right? Or if you're in the southern hemisphere, it's going to be talking about from this point here coming all the way back to here, right? So those are two revolutions in both sides of the hemisphere. So this is the feast of ingathering. It says at the year's end. So it's the revolution of the sun in its course. So years come from sun, right? Now let's look at moon and constellations. Nights. Let's go back to the book of Genesis, chapter 1 and verse 5. It says, "And God called the light day, and the darkness he called night, and the evening and the morning were the first day." So what you're seeing here is after the ushering of the light, right? The presence of the light, when it goes away, that darkness is what is called night. What happens? Let's go to verse 16. It says, "And God made two great lights, the greater light to rule the day, the sun. When the sun departs, that's the end of the day, and then the ushering of the night comes in." So it says, "The lesser light to rule the night." So nights come from moon and constellations, right? Now weeks, like I said, we have to understand these things not from this English or Western culture, but we have to go back to the Hebrew understanding because it carries a concrete meaning. Week, what is considered a week? Weeks, what is considered a week? We have to go back to the Hebraic thought process, the Hebrew reality, to understand what a week is rather than just taking what we've learned into this in this modern culture, English culture, our Western society, and try to impose it on the Hebrew culture. So let's understand what a week is. It says, Exodus chapter 20 and verse 8, "Remember the Sabbath day to keep it holy. 6 days shalt thou labor and do all thy work, but the seventh day is the Sabbath of the Lord thy God. In it thou shalt not do any work, thou, nor thy son, nor thy daughter, thy manservant, nor thy maidservant, nor thy cattle, nor thy stranger that is within thy gates." Right? Now, let's look at it. It says, where can I put this now? Okay, let's put it here. So we're seeing that a week is 6 work days plus a Sabbath. That is a week, right? Now we have something called New Moon Day. New Moon Day is not a Sabbath, right? New Moon Day is not a Sabbath. New Moon Day is not one of the 6 work days. So where does New Moon Day fall in this week? Let's go to the book of Ezekiel, chapter 46, and verse 1. It says, Thus saith the Lord God, the gate of the inner court that looketh toward the east shall be shut in 6 work days. But on the Sabbath day it shall be opened, and in the day of the new moon it shall be opened. It already says it will be closed on the 6 work days. It will be open on the Sabbaths. Where is new moon? New moon would be right here. So the beginning of your month would be the day of the new moon, right? Now, the reason why you can cook on this day, even though it falls at the 7th day, right? Because the 7th day is determined by the moon, right? So you have the new moon day. It doesn't come with a preparation day. Sabbaths come with a preparation day. That means you can cook on the day before. So the new moon day, this is not considered a week. It's a day by itself. A week has 6 work days and a Sabbath. But what you'll notice is there are 6 work days between all these. Say, for example, today is what? Sunday. If your new moon day is today, that means tomorrow, Monday, would be your first work day, all the way up until Saturday. Sunday being the 8th, because from here to here would be 8 days. Sunday to Sunday is 8 days, not 7. So this is why some people get confused when we say the first Sabbath is on the 8th of the month. The 8th day of the month is the 7th day of the week. The 15th day of the month is the 7th day of the week. The 22nd day of the month is the 7th day of the week. The 29th day of the month is the 7th day of the week. And the first of the month is automatically the 7th day of the week. Right? So you don't count new moon days when it comes to week. And this is where people get confused again when it comes down to the feast of weeks. He said count 7 weeks. So that means you cannot count new moon day. It says 7 weeks. You cannot take 6 days from the previous moon with this current new moon and call it a week. That exists in the English culture, but that does not exist. You cannot do that with the moon. So weeks come from the moon, right? Now let's look at months, right? Months. Matter of fact, let's go to the book of Ecclesiasticus 43. Let's go to the book of Ecclesiasticus chapter 43 and we'll start at verse 6, right? It says, He made the moon also to serve in her season. So we can see season is another word for moon in terms of appointment, right? It says, He made the moon also to serve in her seasons for a declaration of times and a sign of the world. So there are 12 seasons in a year, meaning there are 12 appointed times, 12 months in a year. So we're dealing with the word moedim in modern English, modern Hebrew. Moedim, 12 appointed seasons. So the moon is responsible to be a sign for those appointed festivals. So this is the book of Ecclesiasticus, chapter 43 and verse 6. It says, He made the moon also to serve in her season for a declaration of times. So what is that saying? There are how many seasons in a year? 12. You have 12 moons, 12 months, 12 seasons, 12 appointed times in a year, in the course of a year, right? It says, and a sign of the world. From the moon is the sign of feast, Moedim. So there are 12 of them in the year, right? Seasons in terms of Moedim is different from season in terms of year tide, which we will look into later, right? It says, and the sign of the world, from the sign from the moon is the sign of feast, a light that decreaseth in her perfection. The month is called after her name. That's very important. The month is called after the moon, right? Now, what you need to understand with Hebrew is Hebrew goes by a concrete function. English, moon is just moon. In Hebrew, if you're talking about the month, you have one word, yarak, yarak. If you're talking about the month, if you are talking about the month, you have one word to give a concrete definition of what you're referring to. So if you hear the word yarak, yarak, then you know it's talking about a month. So the moon is used in terms in the context of the period of a month. If you hear the word kadash, then the moon is talking about what? The new moon. The new month. So just like you would say the 1st of January, the 1st of February, the 1st of March, and so forth, is the same you would say the first of the month. The first of the month. The first of the month is the same. The first of the moon. The first of the moon. The first of the moon. So the Hebrew carries something more concrete. So by the persons use the word, you know exactly what they're referring to. There's another word. If you're going to talk about the shape of the moon, that's another word. So once you hear that, then you know the person is talking about the shape. If you're talking about the light of the moon, that's also a different word because Hebrew carries a concrete definition, right? Now, like I said, there are 12 seasons, 12 months in a year. So let's go to the book of First Chronicles, chapter 27, and we'll read verse 1. It says, Now the children of Israel, after their number, to wit, the chief fathers and captains of thousands and hundreds, and their officers that served the king in any matter of the courses, which came in and went out month by month throughout all the months of the year, of every course were 24,000. So when you go through the rest of the chapter, you'll see that it goes all the way up to it goes all the way up to verse 15 that says the 12th captain for the 12th month. So there are 12 months throughout the course of the year. When the sun makes complete revolution, you have 12 months in that cycle. Now this is the book of First Kings, chapter 4 and verse 7. And Solomon had 12 officers over all Israel, which provided victuals for the king and his household. Each man his month in a year made provision. How many men? 12. How many months? 12. So now we're going to look at the calendrical cycle. This is the book of Wisdom of Solomon, chapter 7 and verse 17. For he has given me certain knowledge of the things that are, namely, to know how the world was made and the operation of the elements, the beginning, ending, and midst of times, the alterations of the turning of the sun, and the change of seasons, which we're going to get into, right? The circuits of years. The circuit, remember I was saying earlier, this is not a diagram of the earth. This is the circle of the heavens where the sun, the moon, and the constellations revolve to impact changes in the earth, right? So it says the circuits of years and the position of stars. The position of stars going into what? Constellations, the tree of life, right? Now let's go to the book of Job, chapter 38 and verse 21. He said, canst thou bind the sweet influences of Pleiades, or loose the bands of Orion? Canst thou bring forth Mazzaroth in his season? Or canst thou guide Arcturus with his son? So we can see the Mazzaroth is talking about the circuit of the heavens, right? Which you call the zodiac. Yes, it's in the Bible and it's not witchcraft, right? No, you cannot get into agriculture if you don't understand these. Well, today agriculture is based upon labs and so forth, so you don't really need this. But in ancient civilization, you couldn't do agriculture without this, right? Now let's get some understanding. You have the circuit of the heavens, right? The first thing you need to identify is what? Your four cardinal points, right? So how do you identify? The sun, the sun rises in the east, right? At the beginning of the year, the beginning of its revolution, it rises in the east. It sets in the west. So if you're standing with east on your right hand and west on your left hand, it means you're facing where? North. And if you're facing north, that means behind you is south. So you have east, west, north, and south. So after you've identified the four cardinal points, now you know where your point of spring is going to be. It's going to be right here, right? So you can identify where the first season or the first appointed time is going to be. That's when the sun crosses the center of the sky. Now, once you identify these, you identify your different seasons of the year. So you know you have spring, summer, autumn, and winter. right? Now the elements are very important. Why? Now we're gonna look at each month, and we're gonna look at it in terms of agriculture, and you're gonna see why the elements are very important, not only for agriculture, but even for our own individual selves. Once you understand how the elements work and how it affects you, mind, body, and soul. For example, I'm earth element, right? This is my annual cycle. But guess what? I need to know my opposing energy. So if I'm earth, then I have to understand when water element is being an opposing force. Because the earth can stop water, but there are times when the flood is so big that the water can be more dominant. So it's the same way with our bodies. So if you're a fire element person, guess what? You have to understand how the air works, because these are constantly shifting every day, every season. It's constantly shifting. So you have to know which element is predominant above the other three, and then you can know how you're going to be interacting with the outside world. For example, what if you're a fire element? What if the fire element is predominant in you, right? What happens when the rain comes? You're more humble, you're more relaxed, you're more in this peaceful state of mind. But what happens when the water element is predominant and then there's more water, the water season of the year, the rain is falling, water everywhere, you feel more dull. So based on your experience, you can tell which element is predominant in your behavior, in your state of mind. You have to know when your element is predominant, and also the season. So, for example, a fire element person in summertime, how are you going to actually behave when everything is excited? Everything's about activities, everything's about do something. As a fire element person, what happens when it's in the winter season? So you see, there's always a balance in the energy, there's always a balance in the element. So once you understand this, you can understand how you're going to behave throughout the course of the year. There's a time for relaxation. As the scripture said, there's a season for everything, right? So even the elements, when it goes to the winter season, guess what? It's more of a relaxation time. You do less work as opposed to spring and summer. But the system that we're living in now, this is why we're always so stressed, because we work the same intensity right throughout the course of the year. So in winter, when you should be more relaxed or taking it slow because there's not much activity, guess what? Your mind and body is still active as you were in spring and summer. So we're constantly mentally stressed. We're not responding to the heavens. Everything else in earth is responding to the heavens. When it's springtime, the grains come up. When it's water time, the rainwater, the rivers, everything flooding. Everything is going according to the cycle of nature. We are the only ones that contradict our very own nature. We have that intelligence to do that. This is why we're the only ones that sin, because we have the willpower to say no. So let's come back on track. So throughout the course of the year, you have four seasons: autumn, winter, spring, summer, right? The 4 points. Now you have your 12 months in the year where you have your lunar festivals, right? So for the solar festivals, you have the spring feast, you have the summer feast, you have the autumn feast, you have the winter feast. Now lunar festivals. Now in the spring you have the Passover, you have the unleavened bread. In the summer you have the feast of harvest. This is very important. In the fall, you have the trumpet, the atonement, the ingathering, which is called the tabernacles, and you have the feast of lights, which is called the dedication or Hanukkah. This takes place in the ninth month. And then you have Purim, which is in the end of the year, right? So let's talk about each month. When the sun starts the cycle here, this first month is always hot and dry. It's the fire element. Why is it dry? Why is it hot? It's hot and dry because in the first month, that's when you're gonna get to do your plowing, right? Now, depending on your land and so forth, this could be your second plowing. So if you're here when the sun is at the southernmost point, turning around, right? So let's use the Roman months. If you're here, January, you can give your land the first plowing and you let it sit still, you let it rest for a few months. Now you come back here in spring, that's when you give your land the first plowing. You take your hoe and you dig the soil and so forth, right? You're not planting in that first month because it's fire. That's your dry month, right? Now the second month after the sun crosses the equinox, that's when you're dealing with earth. So that's the time you plant your seeds in the earth. What happens? They're gonna be sprouting. And then in the third month, what's gonna happen is there comes the water. So your plant are already at a certain size to take the water that's gonna come. This water is what's gonna bring all the nourishment and the fruits to make them ready. Make them ready for what? The fourth month. That's when the sun is at the highest point in the north, right? So where the sun is giving all the energy into the earth. So all your crops are going to be getting ready to harvest. So when the fourth month comes, after the sun goes north and turns back, the new moon that comes after that is what? Is when you harvest your crop. So the feast of harvest is always the fourth month, and you harvest it on what? The full moon. Usually, when you're picking your crops, if you're planting by the moon, you pick your crops on the full moon because it relates to the sap and everything that goes into their plants, right? It's the same if you're doing medicine. If you're going to cut medicine, then you cut it at the full moon and you cut it like within the first hour of the sunrise. So you get everything out of it. So this is why, for example, you can tell a person a certain remedy. They're following the instructions, but guess what? Based on the time that they cut the crop, the herbs, it didn't work for them the same way or the same dosage as you told them. So how you cut your crops or your herbs is very important to the usage of it, right? And coming back down here to the first month, this is like I said, dry. Everything is dry. So even chopping trees are very hard. It's very hard. Why? Because the sap is removed from the tree. So it becomes harder. When the water comes, then it's softer. It's easy to cut. So this is why you do the work according to the season. Like I said, wisdom follows the law of nature. You do the right work in the right season, then you don't burden yourself. If you're using the wrong season to do the right work, then you're still gonna be in problem because we're not following the laws of nature, right? So the fourth month, this is where you harvest your crops. You bring them the first fruits to the kings, the priests, the congregation, whatever it is, right? Your harvest. That's what it is. No, this is the first fruits. So you have another major harvest to do, right? In the fifth month, it has nothing to do with that. It's more about yourself. The sun is coming back. Now, getting into the sixth month of the year, right? So let's say August. That's when you would have your second crop. This is going to be a bigger harvest than here. So in August, you have like you're harvesting all your crops for the seventh month coming. So this is where you have your feast of ingathering or your feast of tabernacles. You have everything you harvest from here. You keep your feast days here at this point. And then the seeds that you have from this harvest is what you're going to store back to this time of the year. Because in the winter, everything is going to be dormant. Seeds are going to take longer to germinate. So there won't be much activities taking place around here. In the eighth month, we're still in the fall season, autumn season. We don't have much agricultural stuff going on here. Like I said, it's more in a reserve state. Everything is going dormant, right? So what you're harvesting in here, you have to store them because for 3 months there wouldn't be much agricultural stuff going on. Now the ninth month, here we have another feast. We have the feast of dedication, right? Now the sun is in the most southern point of the sky. It's in the southern hemisphere, right? Now the new moon that comes after, so means the sun is coming back. And like I was saying earlier, that's where you can give your land the first plowing to prepare it for the coming spring. So these 3 months, everything is kind of dormant. Your mind, body, everything should be in a more relaxed state. You have less intense work to do. So it's important to understand the seasons of the year, the position of the stars. That's what the Wisdom of Solomon says. Because what you'll also notice is that here, okay, let me put it here. Okay, that diagram is not making any sense. Anyway, at this time of the year, you'll notice the Big Dipper. It's upwards. The handle is down. The how can I say? The barrel is this way, and you'll notice that like at 4 a.m. to dawn, that's when you see it, like probably 2 hours, right? So that's telling you that that's that time of the year. As you come around here to the beginning of spring, you see it's more how can I say? It's kind of like the handle part is facing outwards and the head part is facing this way. So in spring and summer, the Big Dipper will be up high, and in fall and winter, it will be down low closer to the horizon, right? So not because I placed this here, I'm not saying it's in the south, it's going to be in the northern part of the sky. So these constellations will also help you to understand what season you are in. Time to start prepare for your plowing when you look at the Big Dipper. So here you see it for 2 hours, but coming on to the spring, you start seeing what early in the evening. So you know it's time to get your plow, get your tools. It's agriculture time. So all of this took place on the fourth day because man was about to be created on the fifth day. Now, I hope this gives you a clear understanding of how the sun, the moon, and the constellations relate to us on so many different levels, especially when it comes down to agriculture. Because, like I said, going back to ancient civilization, you couldn't do agriculture without this. Today, we're living in a whole new world where everything is different, that this is not so important to most people.